So at the end of Unit 4, Iona realizes that it is useless to turn to people for help. And since he has no strength or energy to take any more passengers and ferry them across to different destinations, he decides to return back to the stables. He ties his horse over there, and Unit 5 begins with Iona returning to a place where there are a lot of people on benches and on the floor sleeping. He regrets having returned so early because he had thought he would find some person who would be available to listen to him, but he finds that everybody is sleeping. He also starts thinking that in this whole day he has hardly earned any money, since he was so engrossed in his grief that he did not get a fair price from the passengers that he had plied from one place to another. So he had he did not have enough money to buy food for himself or his horse. While he is thinking such thoughts, he sees in this crowd of people one driver stretching out towards a bucket of water. Iona quickly asks him if he wanted a drink and blurts out to him that his son was dead. Did you hear? He repeats that his son was in the hospital and it was a long story. And when he tries to look at what the effect of his words have been on the young cab driver, he sees that the young man has gone back to sleep again. Iona is so disappointed and distressed and full of despair because it has already been a week since his son had died and he had not been able to speak about this trauma to anyone properly. Now, by properly, it means that he did not find anyone to whom he could share, with whom he could share this grief and lighten his burden. He wanted to tell this story slowly, carefully, of how his son fell ill, how he suffered, what he had said before he died, and how he died. To really get it off his chest, it would have been a good thing for him to recall every detail, describe the funeral process, the journey to the hospital to fetch his dead son's clothes, and also to talk about his daughter, Anicia. If he had got it all off his chest, maybe his heart would not have been so heavy. Maybe his sorrow would have lightened. He was in need of a listener who would listen to this traumatic tale and maybe gasp and sigh and sympathize with him. But sadly, there was no such person. Perhaps it would have been better if he had talked to some woman, because women are more emotional. Women would have understood his sorrow and maybe shed a few tears and cried, and Iona too would have lightened himself if he had cried along with the woman. But no such thing happened. Unit 6 begins with Iona deciding to go and give his horse a look up. So he puts on his coat, goes to the stable, and tries to distract his mind from the thoughts of his son. He starts thinking of the fodder, the corn, the hay, the weather. He does not want to be alone because he does not want to think of his son. He could have spoken about his son to anyone, but to think of him, the images, the memories, was something that was unbearably painful for him. Iona finally reaches his horse and, in an apologetic tone, talks to his horse for not having earned enough to buy food for it, and gives an excuse that maybe he was too old to drive. He could not make that many trips. But if his son was alive, he would have been a great cab driver. He continues and tells his horse that there is nothing left for him to live, and tries to expect some sympathy from the horse by telling it that if it had a foal and if that foal had died, it would have been a sad thing for it. He was expecting some understanding from the horse. The horse is the only living creature that listens patiently to its master and breathes over his master's hand. Iona feels some kind of a connection with his horse, and his feelings are too much for him. And he tells the little horse the whole story. And here ends this story of grief written by Anton Chekhov. The author, through this story, has really painted a picture of despair and hopelessness, of how Iona could not find a single human being with whom he could share his sorrow. The story brings about man's insensitivity, inhumanity, especially of the lonely and the poor, downtrodden people, and the lack of compassion that the present generation or the people in those times have had. So it's a very disturbing tale of a very tormented soul. Next time, we will do another story.